I'm not crazy. I'm not fucking insane. This I know. This is a fact. I haven't been hallucinating, haven't been tripping on acid. There's no fucking tumour growing in my brain. I don't have any history of mental illness. At all. So I did not make this up. This happened. This is real. Remember that. I can't say exactly what made me wake up. If it was a metallic scent in the air, or if it was the warm, sticky feeling of the blood slowly pooling in our bed. But I remember screaming bloody murder once I realised what was going on. My wife, Darla, hardly registered the noise. She just sort of snorted groggily, eyes all dull and glassy. What's going on? She mumbled. You're bleeding! I yelled. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! I panicked. I could tell by her condition that it was serious. She'd lost a lot of blood, and she looked pale and unfocused. All I could think of was the worst-case scenarios. Death, stillbirth, both of the above. Her gaze was far away, like she had problems staying conscious, and I finally snapped into action, lifted her up and ran frantically to the car. The drive to the hospital was hazardous, to say the least. I swerved into oncoming traffic several times, breaking more or less every existing traffic law, barely even focusing on the road for most of the drive. It's a wonder I didn't kill us all. But I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't imagine my life without her. That's all I could think about. Get to the hospital. Get to the hospital before it's too late. Please, God, don't let her die. I didn't bother parking the car. I drove it right up to the entrance, left it running in neutral, grabbed Darla, ran inside, yelling hysterically for someone to come help me. Help her. I honestly can't remember much of what happened next. Someone came along and took her from me, put her down on a bed, rushed away in a hurry. Next thing I know, I'm just standing there, covered in blood, answering all sorts of questions. She's 8 months pregnant, I sobbed. Please, just save her. Please, please, please. Calm down, sir, some faceless nurse said. We're going to do everything in our power to save your wife, but you have to calm down. You need to help us, help her. I couldn't calm down. I don't think it's humanly possible. Not when someone you love is in danger. When someone you love is about to die. Not when you can't do anything about it. All you have to grab onto is worry, distress, panic, fear, sorrow, sadness. And that's the only thing that keeps you sane. I stood there shivering, convulsing, tears flowing, gasping for air, trying to the best of my ability to answer the questions, to help them save her. Thank you, sir, the faceless nurse said. Please, sit down. I'll get back to you as soon as we have some news. Sit down. Sit down? All I could think about was to scream, lash out, hit something, make the pain on the inside manifest on the outside instead. And they wanted me to sit down? I knew it wasn't their fault. I knew I had no choice. But still it felt so pointless. I hate not being in control. Hate feeling useless. Hate having to wait for someone else to fix it. I slouched down and buried my face in my hands. I couldn't believe this was happening. Not to us. Not now. My mind was racing, and it was always the most ridiculous, insignificant notions I got hung up on. Like how I was going to miss work. I had a major presentation in a couple of days. Important stuff. Or how disappointed my parents would be if I didn't become a dad. Or how I dreaded calling Darla's parents to tell them the bad news. "Don't you just love this place?" a cheery voice suddenly said. I raised my head to identify the owner of the voice. I could have sworn I was the only one around, and I couldn't recall hearing anyone else walking in. But there he was, sitting right next to me. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, long blonde hair, dressed in jeans and a white hoodie. He smiled happily as my tear-filled bloody visage greeted him with shock and disbelief. He had perfect teeth. I remember this vividly. Perfect. "What the fuck do you mean?" I spat angrily. I wasn't really myself, and having some douchebag fucking with me when my wife's life was hanging in the balance, I wasn't having it. "Hospitals, man," he chuckled. "The lovely scent of misery and death. So invigorating." I immediately saw red. I wanted to take a swing at him so badly, but something inside me held me back. I can't explain it, but it was like I knew it would be a horrible idea. "Shut the fuck up," I shouted. "My wife's in there. She's fucking dying for all I know." He threw his head back and laughed heartily. "She sure is," he smiled. "Sweet, sweet Darla. Far too young to bleed out in a hospital bed. Don't you think?" I stared at him with wide-eyed shock and anger. How the fuck did he know? Was he here when I brought her in? Why hadn't I noticed him before now, then? What? Was all I could muster. How the fuck? He chuckled. I know everything, Nick. I know that right now, Darla's dying. She's losing too much blood. They can't stop it. He smiled and leaned in close. His eyes sparkled a hypnotizing emerald green, but I couldn't focus on anything but the smell. It was a lovely fragrance. Sweet flowers and fruits. My wife's fragrance. I give her 5 minutes, he grinned. Then the doctors will come through that door, and your life will never be whole again. But I started, tears filling my eyes again. I couldn't help but to believe him. Every fibre of his being radiated truth and sincerity. Ah, the life inside her? He pointed to his stomach. They'll save it. You'll be a single parent, grieving widower, destined for a life of hardship and perpetual disappointment. You'll drink yourself to death eventually. No one will miss you. C'est la vie. I tore at my hair in despair. His words slithered into my mind, lingering, echoing in there, their hollow, sombre meaning burrowing into my consciousness, imprinting on it a hopeless, dreary, unforgiving existence. No, I sobbed. There has to be something. Some way. He tapped his nose and grinned widely. Funny you should say that. What do you mean? I said. What the fuck do you mean? He smiled and stood up from his seat. He was tall and slim, but at the same time he appeared unnaturally imposing, like he was emanating pure, unfiltered strength. It felt like I was cowering beneath him, like I was nothing but an insignificant ant he could stomp out of existence, should he so will it. A life for a life. He reached out his right arm. Your wife's life, to be exact. I just stared at the hand. What the fuck did he mean? A life for a life. What the fuck was going on here? Who the fuck was this guy? It's real simple, Nick. He bent down and whispered to me. I'll save your wife, but in return, you'll have to let me take another life. I was still staring at the hand, my body tense and rigid. It felt wrong on so many levels. Unnatural, unholy. Something that should never transgress. Who? I asked. Who will you take instead? He grinned. That's always a question, isn't it? It's not life itself that's precious. It's a life you're familiar with. Who? I demanded. Don't worry, Nick, my boy, he chuckled. It won't be someone you know. A perfect stranger. Someone you've never even met. And it will be like they never existed. Gone. Vanished. No trace of them. It's a once-in-a-lifetime deal, Nicky. I'd take it if I were you. I shivered uncontrollably. There were dark forces at work here. That much I knew. Blasphemous powers. But I didn't hesitate. I didn't even consider it. How could I? It was my wife, my one true love. I stood up and shook his hand. Attaboy, Nicky, he laughed. You won't regret this. You might even thank me one day. One day, I started, but was interrupted by a doctor rushing through the door from the ER. When I turned back to face the man, he was gone. Vanished. What was weirder still was that it still felt like I was holding his hand, like we were still locked in that grim handshake. Mr. Matthews, the doctor took my hand. Good news, your wife is doing well. She's weak and exhausted, but doing excellent considering the circumstances. I laughed and cried. A wholesome, wonderful combination of the two. She was alive. She was well. I'd never been happier in my entire life. But then a thought occurred to me. A dark thought. And I muttered, I mean the... Oh, you mean the baby? The doctor smiled. Don't worry, your son is in perfect health. We had to do an emergency C-section, but he's a strong one. You can see them both soon. Son, I whispered. A son. I'm not crazy. I'm not insane. This is real. I told you to remember that. They were fine. Fine and happy and healthy. The two of them. Mother and son. But I couldn't enjoy it. Couldn't believe it. My wife didn't understand. Why wasn't I happy? Why was I acting so strange? I haven't been hallucinating. I haven't been tripping on acid. I went with my wife to every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every physical checkup. I was there every step of the way. There's no tumour growing in my brain. No fucking history of mental illness. So why do they look at me like I'm mad? Why can't they just believe me? I did not make this up. This happened. This is real. I remember everything so vividly. But now it's gone. Vanished. No trace. Like it never existed in the first place. I remember my wife being pregnant. Pregnant with twins.